check, good. So I'm Max Ceron, Max Ceron, CWB Association Welding Podcast. Today we have a really cool guest, Welding Podcast.
The show is about to begin.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the CWB Association podcast. My name is Max Ceron, and as always, I'm always looking for interesting guests from across this fine country of ours to bring onto the podcast. Today we have someone a little bit different coming to us from the Autobody, how should I say this, paint and body world of the trades. I got Marshall. How you doing, Marshall?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing awesome, man. I'm doing awesome. It's actually been a really busy day. I'm tired, and well, you made me work some overtime today, so you kept me after hours.
Yeah. Oh, it happens sometimes, though, right? So not a
Yeah,
big
no,
work, so that's always good.
that's all good. So yeah, so we got Marshall Cameron. You work at Inline Paint and Body. So is this your company, or do you work there?
This is a family business. My dad started at least I want to say 31 years ago now, and yeah, it's pretty much just a matter of growing up around cars. Used to race cars and go to the racetrack and all this and that. So I've been around speed. I've been around paint. I've been around anything and everything you can do with cars pretty much my whole life here. So
So, I'm a kid who followed it into the family business. My dad was a Boilermaker. I got into welding. When you were young as a kid, did you already know that you were going to kind of be doing this, or did you want to rebel and go be a banker or something?
I mean, looking back on it, it all makes sense because I collect Hot Wheels from the ever since you're a little kid. Like pretty much every car guy has collected Hot Wheels for his whole life, right?
Yeah.
And I dabbled in making like little model cars where you assemble them, you paint them, all of that, and I kind of realized later on, like, yeah, obviously I have an itch to get into cars and painting if I'm painting little model cars as a child. So I guess yeah, I got that growing up, it was kind of meant to be. I didn't really know what I was going to do after high school because it did not interest me at all. So it was, you graduate, take a week, and then it's like July 1st, you're starting at the shop and you're just working. Like, okay.
So when you're doing the model cars, I loved model cars as a kid. They were from levels, I think 1 to 5. With one being like the snap ones that are super easy for like no glue. I think level 3 is where they started to get harder. Did you like the really complex ones where you had like the 1,000 little engine parts and the interior parts and the little shifters, or did you like the simpler ones?
I didn't really do a whole bunch. I don't, but I just I kind of get into something and then I just get out of it after a little bit. So I don't think I know I didn't do any of like the super complicated ones, but I do remember having to glue some pieces together. But the thing that really interested me was the painting side because we'd go and we'd buy ourselves a little spray paint can and we'd spray paint the body of the car in the garage at home. And that was more, I cared more about how they looked than actually like piecing them all together.
Hmm. So where are you located? You're in Saskatoon?
We are Saskatoon in the North Industrial area.
Okay, and you said your company's been there for 31 years, so pretty well established place, right?
I would say so, very established. Yeah.
So what's the niche that you guys go for? Like, when you work auto body gigs, there's the OEM guys, then there's like the crazy body show cars, and do you guys kind of look to one type of business more than other, or do you kind of do kind of a little bit of everything?
We mainly focus on insurance claims. We do the odd restoration here and there, or we'll do, a cash job because somebody wants half their car painted because they are a car dealer or they're fixing a write off or something like that. They need their car to look good so they can sell it or whatever it could be. But mainly insurance work. Um, the restoration stuff, it's interesting, but it is a lot of work because the amount of detail that it takes to do one of those, like we couldn't, I don't know, we just, insurance work, my dad was just doing it for so long that it's kind of the thing that we do. But I'm sure if he was dead set on restorations, I'd be 100% in on restorations with it, right? So
Well, and it makes sense, right? It makes sense to do restoration, like I mean, to do the steady work. I've worked on vehicles, and when it comes to, like, first of all, I don't really never really got into restorations. That's a very picky, specific type of work. I'd
yeah,
like to I was more into the customization, which you had a little bit more space because sometimes it was a little bit more free form. Like you're cutting panels out, you're making things new. You're not really sure where it's going to land. It's kind of like you go with the flow. But do you guys do any of that stuff? Do you guys do any, like, you know, body customizations or any frame customization stuff like that?
nothing like that. That does interest me, but it takes a very specific skill set to
Hmm.
be even like somewhat good at it. I would like to try, but I just don't have the time to really deep dive into it. I'm kind of busy with work and other hobbies, so I can't really metal shape like you see on TV or on YouTube. Some of these guys are absolutely nuts with what they can do.
Now, in the auto body world, I've heard some, like, percentages that auto body is 5 to 10% welding. Because, like, there's a lot of different certification bodies involved with auto body work. You have, just to be SGI accredited in Saskatchewan or insurance accredited across, if for other provinces. There's a certain number of markers or accreditations that you guys have to have. And I noticed right away, you guys are ICAR certified. And ICAR, I believe, has something to do with the joining and possibly welding of some panels. Because, like, when you're restoring things, or not restoring, fixing things, there is some welding that occurs. How does someone in auto body learn about that welding? Or do you learn about it in school? How deep does it go? I'm curious because I don't really know much about that.
Well, if you got a good journeyman on staff, he's willing to teach a young guy. Pull him aside and be like, "Hey, here's the welder. Here's how it all works. Here's how to set it up, and let's burn some coupons." You can kind of learn that way. Learning at school is always a good way too, because you don't have to be perfect right off the hop if you're on a job at least. You take a little more time burning coupons there. I pretty much learned to weld for what we do at school when I was doing my apprenticeship.
Hmm.
I didn't really have much time because just the way the that we have things set up for a workflow, I didn't really do a lot of that metal work because I was busy cleaning cars, prepping cars, masking up cars in the booth, and eventually just getting into the paint side. So like doing that body stuff, I didn't do a lot early on, but now I try and do more because it's fun, it's interesting to me. Um, but yeah, for welding, it's just a matter of finding if you can find a journeyman or a shop that's willing to teach you, or you go to school and learn. And even going online to YouTube and finding videos, or on Instagram or whatever, TikTok, everything you can imagine. Even if they're not directly telling you, you just being able to watch somebody do a job, you might be able to pick something up and learn from them.
Now, which parts of the repair work are parts that you have to weld? Like a fender, a front fender, that's just a bolt off, bolt on, prep and paint. There's certain parts that I'd imagine you just, like, throw away and get a new one. But what
Yeah.
are the parts of the vehicle that you have to weld, that there's no getting around it?
Well, it depends if you're working on a Ford or not, because they're all aluminum. But for a steel body car, we're talking quarter panels, box sides, rear body panels, rocker panels, a roof, whatever that might be. Pretty much anything that doesn't clearly have bolts holding it on, because half the cars seem to be plastic these days, anyways. So like, you don't really have to worry about bumpers and stuff anymore. I know you want. I guess you don't really weld bumpers, but what am I trying to say here? Yeah, I
Just
guess
a-
just the parts that are like behind all your doors, essentially inside your B
so,
pillar.
like, the more frame stuff, the heavier duty
Yeah,
stuff.
frames. Yeah, well, frames you can't really repair anymore these days because everything's hydroform. But they do have sectioning locations if your frame is damaged. So I
Mm.
guess welded frames then too. But If you're doing anything aluminum, you're putting rivets in for everything. You're putting glue and rivets, so you're rivet bonding all the cars together.
Well, that was going to be the next question because, like, even in the welding world, we're looking at not even using the word welding anymore because things are getting wider. We talk about joining, the sciences of joining, because joining plastics is welding. There's heat joining of plastics. Some of the new Mercedes vehicles are fully glued together basically, but it's still a type of welding. It's not steel anymore. And when you're talking about rivets with aluminum with epoxies or glues, this is still as strong as a weld can be. You're looking at that 60, 70,000 psi's. How do you learn about that? How do you learn how to use these different materials for joining?
If we get a job that we're not too sure on, we try and reach out to somebody that it might have touched it. We're a small shop, so we might not see, many Ford trucks. We don't really see many Ford trucks to begin with, but we'll deal with a lot of Chevys for some reason. I don't know why that is, but reach out to guys who've done it. But luckily, we can go on. We have a program that tells us the repair procedures, and it is just step by step with pictures saying do this, do that, and the exact order that they want it done. And of course, before you do anything on the vehicle, you're going to do some test coupons, whether you're weld bonding, riveting, rivet bonding, whatever it might be. You're going to make sure that the adhesive you're using is working. And I guess also reading up on all the tech sheets. You don't read your tech sheets and using the glue and it hardens up before you can actually get the panel, well together or riveted together, then you're kind of in a tough spot, right?
Yeah, no, I've learned my lessons with epoxies playing around, and well, and it depends. Some epoxies dry, harden up in 30 seconds, some harden up in 5 minutes. Some it's just how you mix them. Depends what you want, right? So,
Even the temperature affects how fast things dry. So if it's
mhm.
really warm, like what was that? I want to say it's 10 degrees Celsius cuts your work time in half. But if it's 10 cooler, it doubles your work time. But if it gets too cold, it just doesn't work.
It just doesn't even bond.
Yeah, because it has to be a certain temperature for the chemical reaction to work. If it's too cold, it just doesn't want to work.
That's crazy. Now, in terms of aluminum, you said, lots of the new vehicles are aluminum. Do you see a future where auto body specialists like yourself will have to learn to weld aluminum? Or, like, I mean, someday maybe all cars are aluminum and is just riveting and bonding just a procedure? Or do you see like maybe someday there's going to be little aluminum welders in every shop?
We already have to weld aluminum.
Yeah.
So with iCar, there's a steel structural welding certificate you got to get, and then aluminum welding as well. So there's two different courses. We got to qualify every 3 years. You have to get recertified with your steel and aluminum. So you go in, do the course, you weld. The steel one, we actually rebuild a mock frame rail where we section out a little window, get two pieces, weld those together, section in the window again off of your parts piece, and then aluminum is just a matter of just burning coupons. All the different types of welds that you might see on a job. But as for welding aluminum, on a Ford box side, they first came out with this. They said we can use self-piercing rivet. So it's just this gun, it pinches everything together. The rivet goes through. There's no holes to drill nothing. But then the problem is if you do a second or third box side on the truck, now the inner panel is now Swiss cheese because every time you've done it, you have a new hole and you can't reuse the same hole with a self-piercing rivet. So now it's a matter of they want you to drill the holes, just put like a blind rivet. But can you imagine along the leading edge of your box or inside your tailgate how ugly that might be when you have a
Yeah.
rivet head? So in cases like that, we end up just plug welding all the holes so that you can at least grind it flat and it looks like there was nothing there.
Hmm. Now, what type of welding process do you guys use? Is it like a little MIG aluminum welder or TIG, or what do you do?
We use a MIG welder. I think if you used a TIG welder, correct me if I'm wrong, but you would have better control of your heat which could leave you a prettier weld. I imagine it'd be just as strong as well as a MIG welder, because some of these welds, they end up looking kind of ugly. But if you have steel, it seems like you can really be little fine tuning better with the steel than the aluminum.
Well, the problem with aluminum is that it dissipates heat so much faster. So you have to weld actually way hotter with aluminum in order for it to blend nicely. With TIG, you can really hone that in. Plus,
Yeah.
you're using an AC cycle, so it's going back and forth. It's got that buzzing AC sound. For MIG, you have to either run the MIG in DC negative or on AC. Now, if you have a MIG AC, that's like a $30,000 machine. Most people don't have a MIG AC welder. Not that many companies even make them. That's where you get a really nice MIG weld. But in most auto body shops, you guys aren't running $30,000 machines like a fancy welding shop would. You usually have the smaller little MIG setups. Now those will melt the aluminum, but it's not going to look nice, like you said. It's going to not look very hot. It's going to spatter. The wire's going to kind of slam into it and sometimes not melt properly. And like, I mean, really the only thing you can do is just crank it up, but then all of a sudden you'll blow a hole right through,
Yeah.
right? So that's the tricky part. TIG, you would have way more control on that for sure, especially if you have an AC cycle. Like I know that like the new ESABs have a little 205 AC machine. That would be something like perfect for a shop like your size, where it has kind of all the technology in one unit. But these are the issues that I've always wondered about in welding. So, like CWB, the company I work at, we're coming out with auto body certifications of our own, to kind of compete against the iCars and the other companies out there. And I know that we have a steel, aluminum, silicone bronze, maybe something else in terms of welding coupons, but from the outside, I've never worked on any stuff like that. So like I know it's a product that we're developing and we're setting up deals with. I think we have a deal with Volkswagen Audi right now to that they're like the first group that we're going to work with for OEM standards. But hearing what you guys have to do, how does iCar train you? How does iCar set you up for this? Do they say you should buy this type of welder? These are the consumables you need to buy. This is the gas you need to buy. Like how well do they set you up to figure this out?
They don't really tell us what to buy. Um, SGI has kind of lined up saying this is the kind of specs you need on your machines, and then you have to make sure that it's certified by we
Somebody.
somebody, right? And as long as it has the right specs, because you can do like a third party certification, and the big bonus to that is you pay into this certification, they check over your equipment, they audit that you have everything, but then
Mhm.
you get on their website and they get a little bit of marketing if people actually go on their website to look at a body shop near them for repairs. But pretty much SGI is determined that these are the specs that we want to see in a machine, and that's kind of what you get. And you can't just go out and buy a Lincoln or a Miller because they're not actually certified for body repair.
And that's interesting because you'd think that they would have above and beyond what you would need.
Yeah, they just didn't pay for the certification. I guess I have no idea.
Probably. There's probably a deal there because I do know that Lincoln makes little welders for auto body. Like if you go to Sask Poly in Regina, I believe they're all little Lincoln machines. Or maybe not. They were red. Maybe I'm just thinking red is Lincoln, but maybe they're different.
Yeah, because I don't remember seeing. I mean, this is years ago now since we bought our welder that was certified. So like, I don't remember seeing a Lincoln or coming across a Miller that would suit our needs.
Hmm.
But I know at Sask Poly in the city here, they got a bunch of small little Lincolns and Millers. But I think the reason they run those is because they have a class of 12 guys, and they're not the most expensive welders. Because if they went and bought out the best of the best, well, that's a lot of money to be spending on welders for guys who are just trying to learn how to weld.
Yeah, and their profession isn't going to be full-time welding. It's just going to be little pieces here and there.
So I know that they do have Pro Spot branded welders there that are, Autobody certified, let's say. So they do actually have the proper welders that, the students, the apprentices can actually use while they're doing their project.
Pro spot welders. I'm gonna Google these because I want to see what their deal is. What makes them so fancy?
Well, here's one thing you need to Google is what do they call it? A squeeze type resistant spot welder. So if you look at the pinch welds of your vehicle, you can just pull the rubbers back on your B pillar by your door there. You'll see
Mhm.
all the little welds, and it's all it is just two electrodes that come. They squeeze really tight together. Electricity gets ran through, and it just welds it perfectly. Your heat effect zone is tiny, and you can actually weld through glues to weld bond panels on using that machine. So we actually you have to have one of those machines to be certified in Saskatchewan to do repairs. So it's really nice when you have that because you can essentially squeeze type all of your panels back together and there's no dressing of welds. As soon as you do it, it looks exactly like the OEM did right from the get-go. And there's really no extra grinding. There is no grinding that you need to do on a panel after you weld it together. So it's really nice that way. And then plus, like I said, the heat effect zone is small. And if it calls for a glue, well, now that glue surrounds your weld, unlike a MIG welder where you have a bigger weld,
Mhm.
and there's more chance for corrosion to begin and you could have a rusty weld because it's just open to the elements. But when you can use the squeeze type with the glue, it kind of guarantees you a rust-free repair for life.
That's interesting because does this tool also like squeeze? Like it's got pretty good leverage. Like if the panels are a little bit off, there's a gap. Will it squeeze them together and weld them, or do you have to put in other clamps?
Yeah, you're better off the clamp because if you don't, you might not get a nice weld. It
Yeah,
might not actually work. And then sometimes if it's not clamped tight, you'll see a whole bunch of sparks fly in the shop because it wasn't exactly perfect. But again, just putting a clamp beside it makes all the difference in the world. So
judging from the smile on your face when I asked that, you've done that a few times.
yeah, like, I mean, I always try and test the limits of the equipment so I know like where not to go. So when
Mhm.
the sales guy was coming by the shop, he's like, "Oh yeah, here's our tool," and he's demoing with some coupons, some 20 gauge steel. I'm like, "Oh yeah, that's cool and all." So I grabbed two razor blades out of the cabinet and said, "Okay, can we weld these two razor blades together?" He's like, "Well, why would you want to do that?" I said, "Well, I want to know what the machine can actually do." So he's like, "Okay, let's try." Welded two thin razor blades together, and it held. It was like I was very impressed that it was matching. I don't even know what gauge of steel that was, but it was very impressive.
I'm looking at these pro spots right now. Oh yeah, I've seen these. They're kind of neat. So this is the i5. This is the one that squeezes.
Yeah.
Double acting spot gun with water cooled arms. Oh man, you can get right fancy.
Yeah. Yeah, everything's water cooled. The tips are water cooled, and it's just antifreeze that you put in a car.
And this is the same company that does the standard welders. Okay, no. Oh, I see. So this, I'm actually learning right now as I'm talking to you because it's like this welder is approved by Tesla. This welder is approved by Volkswagen, Audi. So
Yeah.
if you wanted to get into certain, OEM classifications, you'd have to buy that machine that's certified for that auto group.
Yeah. Exactly.
So if you wanted to, man, that's so complicated. I'm learning so much. So like if you wanted to get into another company's vehicles, you'd have to have two welders, even though they might be identical. You have to use the one that they approved for that weld on that vehicle.
Pretty much, yeah.
Wow.
It does get a little complicated. You just kind of, I don't see it ever going this way, but you just hope that it doesn't go where like you have to be certified with all the OEMs because if that was the case, then you might have 8 welders in your shop then, and maybe
That's what
that
I was yeah. That's what I was just thinking looking at this. It's like, well, what if? And then what do these run? Do they run off 220 or 110 or anything?
3 phase.
Oh, you gotta have like 575 or like major power.
Yeah, you got some very serious power.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's take a break now for our commercials. And when we get back, oh man, it's getting really dark in here. I need better lighting. When we get back from our commercials, I want to talk about, what it's like in the future. What you're seeing are the advancements coming and joining, and even this technology that you're teaching me about and how it works. So for all the listeners, we got Marshall Cameron here, and he's at Inline Paint and Body, and we'll be right back after these commercials from our sponsors. And we are back here at the CWB Association podcast. My name is Max Ceron, and I'm with Marshall. He's laughing at the commercial break there because in our world, there is no commercial break, but it sounds funny, doesn't it?
Yeah, it was a pretty long commercial break for us. I almost
All right, man. They can see the clock behind you, like exactly what time it is. So right before the break, we were talking, like you're telling me about, these certificate, like to be certified auto body and do one weld, you have to have the insurance company on board. You have to have the certifications from ICAR and the training and whatever they require to make the insurance companies happy, meet the OEM requirements. And then even the equipment, the welders themselves have to be certified to do those things. That's a lot of steps just to do some resistance welding along a seam or to do a couple spots on a body panel. Do you feel that this is adequate? Is too much, not enough? All these levels, or is this just how all auto body is? Every part of the car is, this amount of detail.
I feel like at the end of the day, it all comes down to safety, and you got to make sure that every tech that is touching the car is doing the repairs properly and knows how to weld. Some days I'm always like, yeah, this is a little overkill because I know what I'm doing and I can handle it from what I know now. And then I get to some days where you deal with a guy or you see a customer and he might have done some of his own work. He just wants to get something painted. You realize after the guy did some welding on his own vehicle, you're like, this is exactly why they bring in all these certifications because off the street does not know how to weld. Doesn't matter if he knows, oh, I've been doing this for 20 years. Well, you've been doing it wrong for 20 years. So let's begin with that. But yeah, it's definitely, I don't think it's too much. I don't think it's too little. I think it's right where it should be.
Yeah.
Uh, it definitely is set. The rules are set to make sure that every repair coming through your shop is going to be done properly by a trained technician.
And like you bring up the street, hobbyist and worker, and I was that guy. Like, I mean, I've done cars for people, but I had to be real clear with them up front. I am not a licensed technician. I'm not a mechanic. The second I start to modify your vehicle, like literally the second I start cutting things up here, this is not street legal. This is now a show car. It gets from A to B on a trailer, and if you want to be on private property and rip around, that's on you. But do not come back to me saying SGI's up your throat because your car got pulled off the road. That's not what we do, because I never wanted to even pretend to be OEM certified or making things to spec. Like, I mean, I cut springs with grinders, man, like just to drop cars. Like, there's some sketchy things that I've done to make a vehicle look cool that there's no way that thing should be on the road, and you have to let the customers know that, right?
Yeah, it's safety is always going to be the number one priority. We do body integrity inspections. So if you buy a total loss vehicle, you need to get it past the body integrity. And some of the guys don't like hearing the issues I have with their cars because it's going to cost them more money. But it's like I can't, in good faith, put a car back on the road because you sell it to somebody and then they get into an accident. And then what happens? They get hurt because the car doesn't react the way it's designed to absorb energy from the collision, right? So I
Mhm.
have everything is safe, otherwise I get in trouble. And even in the States, there was a big lawsuit. It was like a head-on collision or something like this, and I believe it was in Texas. They put a roof skin on, but they didn't do it 100% the right way, and the car didn't absorb the energy and didn't, I guess,
Crumple the right way. Yeah.
didn't pull in the right way it was designed to, and people got pinned underneath the car, and there's injuries and all this stuff. This body shop got sued for like tens of millions of dollars or something like that, all because they didn't quite follow the proper OEM repair procedures. So, well, repair procedures is the biggest thing that we can deal with right now is making sure that we're following it to a T. If you don't do it right and you get caught, well, now it's on your dime to fix what you just did because even just like your sectioning locations, you're doing a quarter panel. If you're not in the right spot and you get caught, you're redoing it on your own dime. And a quarter panel is it's a $4,000 or $5,000 typically to put one on, right? So that's
Yeah.
really labor and paint.
So what about, and this is just an ignorant question, but what about you have, Bobby Joe. Bobby Joe puts something on his car because he does it a couple years ago, and then he gets in an accident. I mean, SCI doesn't know about this. They don't, unless you get caught or tattletaling yourself, they're never going to know, right? Now, they end up in your body shop because they got an accident on the same quarter panel, but it's a little bit deeper. They got to get the front frame fixed or something. And you see this shoddy, total, not legit repair. Do you have any onus on you to call that out and be like, hey, we didn't do that, but that's not right. That needs to get taken off and done? Or do you, or is it not your problem? You just deal with what you're supposed to work on?
If we're dealing with an insurance claim and we happen to stumble across some poor previous repairs, we will make a note of it in our file when we submit all of our. We have to submit pictures of every broken part because SGI needs proof of that you have to replace it to make sure that it's broken. But we got to submit pictures and measurements of our coupons that we weld and everything that we come across. We're gonna take as many pictures as we can to save our own ass because we don't want to get in trouble, right? So if
Yeah.
we do finding something that is not correct, we will make a note of it and we will probably end up correcting it on our own dime because we don't want to see a car leave that's unsafe. And it's just sometimes just the way it goes, but even correcting that mistake makes your job easier on that repair that you're doing somewhere else too. So
It'll just make things line up better and fit better.
exactly, except the frame's tweaked over and it's yeah, it's hitting the front, but it's not the same kind of hit that would cause a front sway. Well,
Hmm.
we're gonna have to tug it over because nothing's gonna fit otherwise.
Now, what about the thought, and this is something that's come up, I know, a few times in Canada, and some countries do this in Europe, but not here, and I don't know if it'll ever happen here, but regular integrity checks on vehicles just for pulling them off the road if they're no good or forcing people to fix a vehicle that's no good. I know in Saskatchewan people would lose their mind if that ever happened because we've all seen those farm trucks that are like, the frame's so out of whack they're leaving 4 tracks in the snow. They're right crooked or twisted, and unless they get in an accident, that truck is forever okay. Like you just redo your plates every year and no one knows, no one cares. But that vehicle for sure is not safe. It's probably not as good. It won't stop as good. It won't, all these things that you said, it won't react in an accident as well. What do you think about having some type of, standard check on a vehicle that's just, every 5 years or every 10 years, even you should submit your vehicle for a safety check? Do you think that's a good idea? Or do you think that that's overkill?
I think you would upset a lot of people, but in
Hmm.
Ontario have something like that already.
Yeah. And,
Uh,
some provinces do,
um, it would be kind of nice to see some of these vehicles off the road because sometimes you're even when you're driving beside them, you're kind of like, I don't trust the car as it's going down. But at the same time, like somebody who's driving something that you might call a piece of junk, that might be all they can afford. They can't afford to drive another car. So it is a rusted out old Chevy, whatever you want to call it, but that's just what they need to get from A to B. They can't afford another car.
Yeah, like how do you, like, unless you got, like, you're gonna take someone's vehicle away, well, what are you gonna give them, like bus pass tickets for life or something? Like you said, like there's a cost there as well, or having like some type of buyback. And I haven't seen one of those in a long time. When I was younger in Regina, it'd be like push, pull, or drag. You bring in your hunk of junk, we'll give you 2 grand off the top of whatever you pick off the lot. I haven't seen a sale like that in a long time. I don't know if those things still happen.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but if it there's a fine line between hosing people and safety, and I feel like what Ontario does might be a little overkill. But then again, they salt their roads like crazy, so that salt will just eat away at a car real fast. We're out here; it's too cold for salt to work most
Yeah.
of the. So we just throw gravel down, right? So I don't know what the answer would be. I'm I'm under. I would rather just let people live, and you don't have to be involved with in everybody's life. Like, we don't.
That's pretty good advice. And it's funny because you bring up the salt thing. I just had that conversation with someone in Ontario. They're like, because I said we got snow here already, and they're like, "Oh, all the salt's gonna be going down on the roads." It's like, "Oh man, we do like a salt gravel mix. It's like 2% salt. It's almost none, just a little bit, just to take the edge off." They're like, "Well, why?" It's like it's too cold for salt, and they're like, "What? That's a thing?" It's like, "Oh yeah, -40, salt's frozen, just like everything else, dude. Like it ain't doing anything."
Yeah, definitely not.
So how does salt affect welding? Like, I mean, if like I I like salt is brutal on steel. Like it just destroys it, right? If it's salty as a person that's coming to do auto body work, let's say a car comes in from Ontario, it's got that little bit of a rust edge, but you know that that steel's ruined way further up, you know. How do you guys check it for integrity, or do you just go off of visual? Is there tests you can do to see how far back you got to cut it out, or is it just experience that tells you what to do?
Yeah, it's I don't. There's real no good way of knowing unless you cut apart the whole panel. So if you're just doing a rust patch, you're gonna be doing a lot bigger of a patch than you or the customer wants. So typically, it's cut it back until you actually have some solid metal. Not every time it works like that. Sometimes you are you are forced to weld on some really thin metal, and you're just blowing holes the whole time because that's the only way you can do this repair for this guy because it's the way that he wants it done because he doesn't have the money to say put on a whole rocker panel or something like that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Those jobs every once in a while. We try to avoid them, but it still happens from time to time. And it's just, yeah, the rust is cut out as much of the cancer as you can and then try and start with fresh metal. I mean, if you can stick your finger in behind a panel and feel if it's smooth or if it's not, then you keep cutting away until you get to a something that is fresh.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to ask you something that people said I overreacted when it comes to auto body, but a few years ago, I think in 2016, I bought a brand new Lincoln MKZ, like this beautiful black. It was all black, murdered out black Lincoln. It was nice. 3 months after I bought it, the whole welding seam on the door, like that crimped welding seam on the door, started to rust right from top to bottom. Like the whole thing was rusted. So I started looking at it. I'm like, is that rust? And it had already like rubbed into the where it closes in on the vehicle on the frame. There was a couple spots of rust there because it's like a cancer. It spreads. Whatever it touches up against is going to jump, right? So I had a couple little rust spots on the frame side. The whole seam of the door was rusted, and this car is like 3 months old. Like I think I had like 8,000 kilometers on it. I took it back to Lincoln and I was like, "Hey, this car's rusting." And they said, "We'll just grind that little bit out and repaint it and you're good to go." And that didn't sit well with me at all. I was like, "I work in steel every day of my life and I know that that little bit of what you're about to do is not going to stop this and it's just going to go. Like I need like a new door or you cut this all out and redo it and you're gonna have to work on the other side." They're like, "No, we'll just sand it and paint it. We have like a spray that stops rust, and then we paint it for you." Now, who's right? Were they both me and I overreacted, or is there actually would that have worked? Would they have been able to just sand it out, paint it, and it would have been good for 30 years?
They could slow it down.
Yeah,
I imagine the spray is going to be like some sort of wax oil. It'll have rust inhibitors in it, but it
yeah,
doesn't surprise me that you bought a Ford and because we're talking like the door skin around the inside of the door.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
common for most vehicles, especially Fords. It just starts from the inside, then it works its way around, and eventually works its way around the door to the outside skin of your vehicle. And there's really not much you can do to stop it 100%. But if you're going to buy a brand new vehicle, don't use the dealership when they say we're going to rust proof your vehicle, because what they do is not adequate. Go find a guy who does rust proofing and corrosion protection for a living, and they'll spray in that wax oil that has that rust inhibitor in every single seam that you have on that vehicle. So inside the doors, rockers, quarters, wheel wells, you name it, they'll spray that everywhere. That stuff just seeps in, and over time just gets further and further in. And that should slow down any issues you have with rust. You might want to go in every year. I guess it depends how crazy you want to go every year, because then they can touch up spots that just get extra wear from just driving on the road, and they might even just touch up all the seams and stuff and all your pinch weld areas, because it's always good to keep that stuff fresh and full of wax oil in it, because you don't want to have that issue with that you're having there. So
Yeah, I just gave him the car back. I'm like, I don't want it.
yeah.
I was like, I have a brand new vehicle, and like Lincoln's supposed to be like the top end, and it's rusting like this. Like, I don't. And you hear these horror stories. Like, someone buying a buddy of mine bought a brand new Silverado. It was like $80,000 truck. 6 months in, his bumpers are rusting.
Yeah.
Like, why is this happening? Like, in your experience with working on vehicles, and this is your living, why do we see this in certain cars, certain places? Why can't the manufacturers seem to figure this out? If there's this wax sealant that stops rusting, why isn't this just part of the vehicle's production process? You know what I mean?
Comes down to money.
Yeah.
The truck is going to be worth $3,000 more, and then people might not be able to finance that vehicle. So if they just do it third party after the dealership has bought the vehicle and sold it to you, then it's on you to figure out that your vehicle needs to be protected, not on Ford or any other manufacturer to figure out that this needs to be protected. It's not their problem, right?
Hmm.
Because if their vehicle rusts out, then well, you just go back and buy another one that isn't rusty, right?
Yeah, like I just sold my Chevy Silverado or Sierra, a GMC Sierra, sorry. I had 400,000 clicks on that thing. It's been to potash mines. It was like the rest was the only thing holding it together. And I was like, I got to get rid of this thing. It's in bad shape. But I think about these vehicles, and I mean, that truck was 20 years old, 21 years old, 400,000 clicks. And then I see trucks that are 5 years old and are like just as rusty. It's like, what the heck's going on? And I don't believe that it's the same. Like, it can't be a steel quality. It's got to be a finishing issue. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because I would think the steel is still steel.
Yeah, they might not be putting it all comes down to cost. They might not be putting the
Hmm.
best epoxy primers or e-coats everywhere, because that could add value or add money to the vehicle, and that affects the bottom line. It could be something as obvious as that. Usually it comes down to making the vehicles as cheap as possible. It seems these days everything's made of plastic, and I would just probably think that they're just not using the best of the best products.
Hmm.
They want to save some money building the vehicles themselves. So
And then what about the aluminum vehicles? I hear people say all the time, well, aluminum doesn't rust, but that's not really true because aluminum does oxidize.
they don't rust. It's 100% true. They just corrode in a different way.
Yeah. So if it doesn't rust, which is what we think of oxidization, but it corrodes, which is a different process, salt will lead into aluminum, just like anything else. You know, do you see the aluminum vehicles having less issues like with paint and with, these oxidization issues that steel vehicles do, or do you see them oxidizing or corroding in different ways?
They pretty much corrode in the same ways. If that paint barrier gets broken by a rock, that's usually how a bumper starts rusting out. A rock will hit it, and then now there's that one little spot of bare metal where moisture in the air gets into it, and then it just starts going from there.
Hmm.
Same for aluminum. Along all of your seams, there could just be a little break in the finish from when they put the vehicle together, and it just starts from the inside and works its way out. There's really no avoiding it. But again, if you just go and get that wax oil sealant stuff, then you can slow it down for sure, and maybe even not have to worry about it for 20 years if you keep up with it for sure.
They should just at the factory when they have the frame together before anything else, they should just dip the whole thing into like a plastic coat. Like,
Yeah.
but then you might be out of work. I don't want you to be out of work either. So
I don't really want to work on rusty stuff. I rely.
yeah, you do. Sorry.
I get excited 'cause I'm like, sweet, it's going to be slipping and sliding season here, and let's get some work going through the doors.
Yeah, but nobody get hurt, right? Nobody get hurt.
Nobody gets hurt, right?
Right, right.
Don't want anything like that.
Now, for the future of your company, like, is your dad looking to retire? Are you going to be taking over? You got brothers and sisters that are in the game. What's it look like for the future of Inline Paint and Body?
I would like to say that he retired, but he's a busybody, so I don't think he could ever truly let go, which isn't the worst thing because at least you have, 30, 40 years of experience behind you when a guy does take over. Right? I would like taking over one day. As for trying to like take the shop into a different spot or like to expand, it's really just a matter of taking what he's done. Then if I can find efficiencies or a new way to make things a little bit bigger, better, if that's even possible, I would like to think that I can make things a little better because fresh eyes and newer age, even things like posting on social media. He initially he wasn't keen on that, but even something like that to help your business, it's huge because it's actually starting to bring in claims and insurance work. And yeah, it's just a matter of keeping up with the trends to make sure that you're on par with everybody else. And yeah,
Yeah, well, you got a YouTube video, almost 2,000 subscribers. You got, your Instagram. You got. I think you have a. Do you have a TikTok?
I do TikTok. I post pretty much in it on everything. I kind of try and do Facebook and LinkedIn, but I'm not very. I don't really do that often. I almost just forget or I'm too lazy to do it. But YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok are kind of the big ones right now for me.
Yeah,
Um,
you got almost 13,000 followers on TikTok. So, like, yeah, that's well, and so many people on the podcast. This is the future of marketing, right? This is how you market, and it's how the young kids coming up, or I shouldn't even say young kids anymore. Like, it's 20, 30-year olds. They're the ones making money, and this is how they research, right?
yeah, like people don't really like you Google something, but the next thing you might do is go on Instagram and see if the business has a page, and then let's see. It could be a bakery, and as long as the pictures look really good versus the bakery that just takes really grainy photos with their phone, you might choose to buy donuts at the one that has really pretty pictures, the one that doesn't look like they put effort into it.
Yeah,
It's marketing, exactly. It's marketing. It's free to use. It just takes some time and trying to get better at making videos. It's not really the thing that I've been doing for years and years, but I'm slowly learning to get better and better and trying to make things look as satisfying as possible when I'm in the paint booth. Most of my stuff is painting because that's where I'm sitting most of the days, but
mhm.
try and start getting more videos of body work and if I can get some welding or get even if my coworker's doing some welding, get some videos of that, I think that would look really cool too, just to show people like we also do this.
Yeah, and even just looking at your Instagram, like the tools that you use, a specific way you mix things. This is all just interesting. Like, you want to develop I had someone say it to me, you want to build rabbit holes, because people fall into rabbit holes online. It happens all the time. You start scrolling, you click on something, next thing you know, you follow this rabbit hole to wherever. You want your social media to be the rabbit hole someone falls into, where they're like, oh, this looks cool. Next thing you know, they're looking at this and this and this and the other, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping for. Is just the more I can grow, I even if it's not people locally, that's still going to push your page out further to people who are here locally to see your stuff because there's more people interacting or more people following and boost your page or boost your post to everybody. If I can get more people across the board, I'll get more people locally checking out my stuff. And as what word am I looking for is I guess what I want to say is the more followers you have, it makes it look like you know what you're talking about. Fortunately, that's the way it is. Like, oh, this guy's 100,000 followers. he must be the best in the business. But it's like the guy with 100 followers could be even better. It's just, but that's why I like to post the videos to show people like you can actually just sit back and watch my work, and you can make your own judgment. You don't have to go based off the followers that I have versus another shop. You can actually just see what I'm doing.
Well, and that's an interesting thing you bring it up, and it's in the welding world. That's a big thing. You know, there's welding videos, there's welding channels, welding people on Instagram and YouTube and whatever. They have like hundreds of thousands of followers, but maybe they've never even worked in a welding shop in their life. They just, this is all out of their garage, and you never want to diss anyone. Like, good on you. Like, that's amazing that you do that. But then the people that I've met in my life that are just crazy good welders, but they're in a shop and they don't care about social media. No one's ever even going to see the work they do. And you sometimes it's like, it's almost like unfair. You're like, oh, how did this guy get so much? He's driving, a Ferrari or something. He's like rich Instagram person that has never actually done this for a living. They just figured out the algorithm. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think those people eventually everybody figures out that this guy is not exactly the guy that we all make him out to be. People really do see quality work, even if it's through a screen. People do definitely see how genuine a person is through a screen, especially on YouTube. If you're trying to be a famous YouTube blogger, if you're not a genuine person, you're kind of faking it, people are going to figure that out real quick, and they're just not going to watch your stuff, right?
Yeah.
I think the same will still go for if you're posting your work. I think if you really want to like put yourself out there, show your work, even if people have negative things to say. When it comes to welding, everybody seems to have an opinion online. Like that's one thing. It's like if I don't really feel comfortable posting my welds, I probably won't because I know somebody will have something negative to say. And it's like, hey, I'm just a body man here. Like I'm not welding. It's just sheet metal. Like, but yeah,
No,
yeah, it's
I totally get it, man. Like, I'm 20 years past my prime, probably welding. I haven't really welded for money in a long time. Teaching at the college is probably the last time I really welded, like every day. And I still get into weld competitions all the time, and I don't really go into them thinking I'm gonna win. It's just for fun, and I get roasted, man. People are like, "Oh yeah, you like, hey, I never said I was the best welder. Like, I'm just doing this for fun and for the exposure and for the industry, to get it out there and to promote." But I mean, welding is a passion of mine in terms of my career, but it's the same for everybody. Like you do what you know, right? So
yeah. Like when we talk about welding here, I ended up welding some thicker, heavy steel. I'll call it. It's like 11 gauge. When when COVID had hit, it's like, well, the gyms are closed. I feel like this is a good time to build gym equipment because I had some friends asking me like, "Hey, can you build me a squat rack? Can you build me a barbell?" I can't build a barbell, but I can build an axle bar, which is like a 2-inch round bar that's used, well, it's really used mainly in like strongman. I
mhm.
started building equipment, I put it out on Facebook, and I made so many squat racks. And after welding all of that, what I call heavy steel, that is the easiest stuff in the world to weld compared to the rusty sheet metal I've had to deal with in the past. As soon as I figured out how to like get enough heat in there to make it so it's super solid, then I started making them pretty, just doing the little circles to play with the puddle and make them look real. This peak as good as I could ever do. And then talking to like Kevin there, like I mean, he would be like, "Oh, that's like an 8 out of 10 quality weld." I'm like, "Hey, now imagine I'm an actual welder." He'd be like, "Yeah, it's probably more like a 5 out of 10. It'll hold, but it's not the greatest." It's like, well, that's
Good, good enough for me.
fine. Like after doing
Awesome.
that, even after all that welding of 11 gauge or even steel, I found going back to the sheet metal, it made me realize that the thicker stuff, it's like you're doing it in slow motion compared to the thin stuff because you can burn a hole so fast on 20
Mhm.
gauge. So it did actually improve my welding on sheet metal doing that heavy stuff because I had experience in the sheet metal, but then it's like it felt like slow motion. So I kind of understood how the welder's working in relation to the puddle and to the metal and everything that goes along with it.
Yeah, in my world, my industry that I grew up in working, I never welded anything under quarter inch.
Yeah.
Everything I did was 1 inch, 2 inch, 3 inch. And then I went, I had my own shop. And then after my shop, I went back to private industry. I went and worked for like a fancy place that did like kitchen tops, hoods, stainless steel hoods. Everything was like 18 gauge, 16 gauge. I hated it, man. All that thin stuff, it drove me nuts. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm used to just cranking everything and blasting it in.
Yeah.
And now it's like I had to be so slow and careful, and like things would warp so easily. It drove me nuts. And I was like, this isn't for me. I need to go back to my heavy stuff. Like,
Yeah.
and that's still thicker than 20 gauge. Like 20 gauge, man. I feel like I could probably just push through it like with my hand.
Yeah. Yeah. Warping is kind of an issue when we're dealing with cars. Everything's gonna always warp. But you try and like base your welds out and then move jumping around. So you
Mhm.
kind of left with like an ugly seam after you're done because you're jumping around so much because you got to start cold all the time. But you try and do that to mitigate the warping as much as you can. But it just comes with the territory. We got body filler for a reason. So if you're a little bit low, block sand it, you're good to go.
Awesome, man. Well, that's pretty much the interview, man. That was awesome. I learned lots, and I think the listeners will learn a little bit about auto body and even just the regulations and the stuff that you guys got to go through, even to just put that little spot weld on a vehicle. There's a lot of steps involved, and I you taught me lots, so thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It was good.
Yeah, and I always have a couple questions that I finish out with, and first of all, in terms of your development, not your company, but you know, what do you see yourself doing on the side or side hustle, or, you have, I saw your truck that you've been working on, like your baby, looks pretty good. Do you want to start getting into maybe some of that stuff on the side, or do you do stuff like that on the side?
My truck, it's very slow going. When I'm done it, I have a feeling I'm gonna have the itch to keep going and do another project.
Mhm.
But as for doing side stuff, I think pretty much is if I have a real passion or like I have a really like the vehicle, then I'll probably just go and buy it and fix it up like I'm doing with this 97.
Mm.
Other than that, I don't really see myself just doing things for like quick flips on like a restoration. It'd probably be more just for myself, but I wouldn't mind even on the side getting into like pinstriping. Got a
Oh
couple
yeah.
that do it, and it's like I'm not the most artistic, not the steadiest hand, but I think that'd be really cool to learn. I could start implementing that into my world, and even playing around with like those like super lowrider cars where there's like 8 different colors and metal flake and candies all layered on top of each other. Even learning how to do that, I think would be really fun, really interesting.
Yeah, no, I used to have an auto body guy that I'd lean on for our show cars, and he could do like that prismatic paint and all that stuff. It was, you're looking at freaking like $800 an ounce of whatever gold flake that goes in there, and
Yeah,
it's crazy stuff. But yeah, that's awesome. Now,
yeah.
second question I got for you is, you're still a pretty young guy, and I always ask this in terms of going back in time. So, if Marshall was looking at yourself coming out of high school, and your dad's got the auto body shop, and you're kind of thinking, I'm not sure if I want to go down the same path or not. What advice would you give yourself, sitting from where you are now, what you've learned? What advice would you give young Marshall?
If I was gonna give myself advice as a really young kid, I'd say do the art class, do the shop class. Don't take all the maths and all the classes thinking you need these grades for university. Do things that will go more to your creative side. So I might have got maybe more into drawing, which could help with, like I said, pinstriping and all that other extra stuff that I wouldn't mind getting into. Then yeah, like going and taking all these math classes, it's good to know the math. It's like I can do lots of stuff off the top of my head, but like going into the shop class at school, learning how to weld even when you're in grade 12 would have put me ahead into the trade right there. So I guess take those more fun courses at school versus the serious ones that you need for university, which I didn't end up going into. And I guess for younger me, back when I was playing hockey, we always go out with the guys, and I would say just work more, trying to better your skills when you're younger. So it just as soon as you start getting better younger, it's just you get exponentially better long term when you it's like investing money. Like start young and you have a lot of money at the end versus you start later in life, your pot's not gonna be as big. maybe don't go with the guys much and actually put some time into hone in on your skills and get a little bit better and try different things and learn and really push yourself instead of going out to the bar and then sleeping in all day. But
Well,
19 once, so
yeah, I would be terrible at following your advice. I still haven't figured that out, and my pot of money is still very small. So
but now I'm pretty much hooked on anything cars. Golf is my big thing right now because when everything was shut down, there's nothing to do. So I really dove into work, trying to make as much money as I can, fixing cars and try and get better with my skills. Get into social media, but yeah, it's just a matter of you just gotta. I'd say put in more work to get better earlier because it's a lot more fun when you're doing your job and you're confident in your abilities because now you can attack something and you just know like it's a difficult job, but like you've done it before and you can attack and do a real good job.
awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate it. This was a great interview, and for all the people that have been following Inline Paint and Body on Instagram, Marshall Cameron, find him, and he's in Saskatoon. Running the family business. So props to them, and keep it going. And thanks for taking the time, buddy.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And for all the people that have been following the podcast, we're coming up close, getting close to that 100th episode. We already did our first prizes online. Keep following, sharing. We got Ask Max happening in Atlanta. In 2 weeks, we're going to be down in Atlanta, Georgia, filming podcasts and doing live sessions. So hopefully everyone's cool with that. We got lots of Canadians coming down with us too. So we're going to have a big group down there partying and having lots of fun. I mean, working and having lots of fun. And, thanks for all the followers, and keep sharing and keep downloading these episodes, and stay tuned for the next one.
We hope you enjoyed the show.